I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head, every heartbeat, every breath, every grain of sand that shifted under my boots before it all went to hell. We were stationed just outside a crumbling village south of Kandahar, the sun still dragging itself over the edge of the horizon, lighting the dust in a golden haze. My squad and I had trained for this kind of breach 100 times. Jenkins sat beside me in the Humvee, cracking his usual dumb jokes. Rivera was loading up, humming that same damn country song he always sang when he was nervous. Dawson, fresh-faced and still smelling like PX soap, was checking our comms like his life depended on it. And maybe it did. I should have been locked in, fully present. But my phone buzzed inside my vest, and I foolishly, fatally, looked at it. It was a message from an unknown number, but I knew the area code. Home. My gut twisted before I even unlocked the screen. There it was, a photo. My wife. Lying in our bed, wearing the necklace I gave her before I deployed. Her head was tilted back, a satisfied smile spread across her face. And right beside her, half naked and smirking like he owned the world, was Major Roland. My superior. My CO. The man who gave me this mission and saluted me just yesterday like none of this meant anything. My breath left me. I went numb. My mind screamed, but my body just stopped. I couldn't think. Couldn't blink. I just sat there, staring at that photo, while everything around me moved on without me. Mike, you good? Jenkins asked, his voice laced with concern. I looked at him, nodded, and forced out a lie that tasted like ash. Yeah, just thinking. He nodded back, trusting me like they all did. Like they always had. I was their leader. The steady hand in the chaos. The guy who didn't flinch, who never second-guessed, who kept them alive. And in that moment, I was none of those things. I should have called a hold. Rechecked the satellite feed. Cross-referenced the convoy path we'd been tracking for 2 days. But I didn't. I couldn't. My head was filled with my wife's betrayal, with Roland's smug face, with the image of my home turned into someone else's victory lap. I gave the go-ahead without thinking it through. We moved out. The village was quiet, too quiet. I should have noticed the lack of foot traffic. No kids, no carts, no dogs barking at our approach. But I was inside my own storm, and I missed every sign. Rivera took point. Dawson followed, with Jenkins flanking right. Thompson stayed close to me, his eyes scanning the rooftops. I remember seeing a curtain twitch in a window ahead, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then I waved them forward, like some goddamn amateur in a training drill. That hesitation, that flicker of doubt, was the last clear thought I had before the first explosion went off. It started with a blinding flash. Rivera disappeared in a puff of fire and shrapnel. His scream never made it out. The blast knocked me back, slammed me against a wall. My ears rang. Dust filled my mouth. Then came the gunfire, from rooftops, windows, alleyways. It was a trap, a full-blown setup, and I had walked them right into it. Jenkins was next, trying to pull Dawson behind a crate before a sniper caught him through the neck. Thompson screamed for backup, returning fire until his clip emptied, then slumped against the wall with 3 bullets in his chest. Dawson, per kid, tried to crawl toward me. I reached out for him, but the second blast took care of the rest. I don't remember how I survived. Maybe I was too stunned to move. Maybe the enemy thought I was already dead. I laid there in the rubble, blood pouring from a cut above my eye, tasting dirt and smoke and guilt in every breath. The firefight lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes that felt like a lifetime. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was already over. 5 men dead. 5 flags folded. 5 mothers who'd never see their sons again. And all because their leader, their brother, let his mind get hijacked by a betrayal he should have buried until after the mission. The next week blurred. Debriefs. Medical checks. Paperwork. Politely worded apologies from command that amounted to shit happens. Roland never even looked me in the eye. At the memorial, he stood in his dress blues, shaking hands with the families like nothing happened. Like he hadn't taken everything from me with one selfish act. I watched Jenkins' mother weep as she accepted the flag. I watched Dawson's little sister clutch his photo like it was the only thing keeping her standing. And I stayed silent, pretending to be the brave survivor, the honorable soldier. But inside, I was unraveling. They said it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have known, that sometimes intel fails. But I knew better. I had the data. I'd ignored it. I had the instincts. I'd buried them. All because I couldn't keep my damn emotions in check. I killed my squad. Not directly, no, but I might as well have pulled the trigger myself. And that was the moment I made a promise. Not for justice. Not for healing. But for balance. Roland had taken 5 lives through betrayal. I would take one, but not with bullets. I'd make him lose everything. The wind was sharp that morning, cutting, even through the heavy black suit I hadn't worn since my grandfather's funeral. I stood at Arlington with my hands clenched so tight in my pockets, I barely noticed my nails digging into the flesh. The flags, all 5 of them, were folded with machine precision and handed to mothers, wives, and sisters who barely held it together. The priest's voice faded behind the sound of gunfire, ceremonial, but it echoed in my chest like real combat. Jenkins' mom collapsed onto her knees as the final note of taps rang out. I didn't move to help her. I couldn't. My body stood still, like if I dared to speak or step forward, I'd confess what I already knew in my soul. I didn't belong among the mourners. I belonged in a courtroom. The Department of Defense issued its statement. Fatality sustained during a mission in volatile territory. No blame. No accountability. The press never picked it up. Just another tragic entry in an endless list of war casualties. Roland didn't attend the funerals. Said he had meetings and DC strategic briefings. Protocol. He sent flowers. Lilies. Cowards' gifts. I stared at those flowers at Rivera's service and thought about how my hands once bandaged that man's arm after a roadside blast. We'd laughed about it later, how I wrapped it like a taco. Now he was in a box, and all Roland could spare was a goddamn bouquet and a 2-line note signed by someone in admin. At the repatriation ceremony, I watched the coffins roll off the plane, one by one, draped in stars and stripes. The honor guard moved in perfect rhythm, saluting and lifting like precision gears in a machine. The moment they brought out Dawson's, something in me cracked. He was 20. I remembered how excited he was the night he turned it. How we shared contraband whiskey and watched a bootleg movie on my laptop. He never kissed a girl before deployment. He asked me if I thought we'd make it back in time for Christmas. I told him, "You'll be home before you even miss your mom's turkey." I lied, and he died. The psychologist assigned to me wore glasses too big for her face and spoke in phrases designed to keep men like me from snapping. "You're carrying survivor's guilt, Mike. This is part of the grieving process. You're not responsible." I smiled, nodded, took the medication she prescribed, then flushed it down the hotel sink every night. I didn't need pills. I needed absolution. And there wasn't a shrink on this planet who could grant it. My wife texted twice in the days that followed. I didn't respond. She tried to call. I blocked her. My voice would have cracked, and she didn't deserve to hear it. 1 week after the last funeral, I walked through the silent barracks alone. Jenkins' bunk still had his comic books stacked underneath. Rivera's prayer beads hung on the corner of his locker. Thompson's half-finished letter to his mom sat folded next to his toothbrush. I opened it, just once, and read a line that said, "Mike's got our backs. Always does." I folded it back with shaking hands. My chest felt like it was being compressed in a vice. My back was soaked in sweat, even in the air conditioning. I dropped to my knees and stayed there for what felt like an hour. I wept. For them. For myself. For everything I destroyed. Then came the awards. Command handed me a commendation. A ribbon I didn't deserve. They said I showed bravery. That I held position until backup arrived. They wrote up some story about maintaining operational integrity under fire. I smiled in the photo they took, but inside, I screamed. I wore that damn medal for exactly 36 seconds, just long enough to walk it out of the building and throw it into the Potomac. Let the fish wear it. I wanted no part of a system that could stamp gold over body bags. That night, I went home. Not to the house I shared with my wife. That was no longer mine. I found a small apartment near the base and stared at the blank walls. For hours. The TV stayed off. My gear sat unpacked. And I replayed it again. The explosion, the screaming, Dawson's hand reaching out, Thompson's voice calling my name before the bullets silenced him. And over it all, like a haunting echo, Roland's voice. Laughing, smug, whispering secrets into the ear of the woman I trusted most. It wasn't just a betrayal of marriage. It was a theft of trust, loyalty, and the mission. He'd weakened me on purpose. Either he didn't care if I broke under pressure or he counted on it. Either way, 5 men were dead, and he slept comfortably while their families buried them. That was when the idea took root. Not revenge. Balance. You don't murder someone like Roland with a gun. You dismantle him, slowly. You make sure the ground he walks on collapses beneath him, brick by brick, until even his shadow won't stand beside him. The next morning, I shaved. I ironed a fresh shirt. I packed away the folded flags and stored them under my bed. And then I opened my laptop. I created a folder called Balance. Inside it, I placed 5 files, each named after a fallen brother. Jenkins, Rivera, Dawson, Thompson, and one more, Price. Because this was the price I'd pay until justice weighed out. And when that balance finally tipped, I swore I'd make Roland feel every ounce of what it cost me. It took exactly 23 days after the last funeral before I saw Roland again. He was walking out of a conference room on base, flanked by 2 junior officers and grinning like nothing had ever gone wrong under his command. The bastard looked tan, relaxed, like the weight of 5 caskets never touched his conscience. He slapped one of the lieutenants on the back and said something that made them both laugh. I stood across the courtyard, in plain view, waiting for him to look my way. He didn't. Not because he didn't see me, he did. He just chose not to acknowledge me. That's how Roland operated. If it wasn't useful, it wasn't real. That moment confirmed what I already knew. I'd lost everything, and he hadn't lost a damn thing. That night, I dug deeper into the photos, texts, and call logs I'd saved from the deployment. I wasn't just going to ruin his life. I was going to make it impossible for the world to ever trust him again. I started by tracing back the affair. Turned out, it wasn't new. Not by a long shot. The messages went back 9 months. While I was still stateside prepping for Afghanistan, they'd already begun meeting. Dates, hotels, dinner reservations. Some of them charged to his government card. Idiotic. Arrogant. It didn't stop there. I uncovered a burner account where he sent funds, probably hush money or cover up expenses. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full betrayal of protocol, ethics, and trust. I wasn't the only one he manipulated. My wife was just the most convenient weapon. I needed access. Deeper access. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Calloway. We'd served together in Syria, back when neither of us had any gray in our beards. He worked cyber now, buried somewhere inside military intelligence. I didn't feed him the personal angle. Just said I needed eyes on a potential internal breach. He owed me. We exchanged a few encrypted messages, and a week later, he dropped a flash drive in my P.O. box. No note. No return address. Just a black drive marked with one word. Warranted. When I opened the files, I saw everything. Contracts misappropriated. Supply manifests that didn't line up. Missing equipment signed off under Roland's credentials. It looked small at first, just a few $1,000s worth of unaccounted gear. But with each layer I peeled back, the rod expanded. There were whispers in some of the emails, code names, altered receipts, people inside logistics being paid off. And the worst part? All of it was timed during my deployment. While I was leading missions, Roland was orchestrating a side operation, siphoning military resources and running what looked like a black market gear trade. The affair, I realized, was just one branch. The root was deeper. He was using me, distracting me, because I was loyal and loyalty makes you blind. But I wasn't blind anymore. One night, I drove to the old range where Jenkins and I used to train after hours. I set up 5 steel targets, each painted with a name. Not theirs, no, their names deserved reverence. I painted Roland's aliases, the shell companies, the shadow networks, and I shot every one of them, one by one, until the paint ran like blood down steel. I didn't feel better. This wasn't about therapy. It was about clarity. I had what I needed to bury him. All I had to do now was build the grave. I created a burner identity, Ghost of Jenkins. It was a quiet homage. That name would be the blade I used. I started slow. Anonymous reports to internal investigators. I made sure not to dump everything at once. That would spook them. No, I wanted it to trickle. Let them dig on their own. Every breadcrumb I left was carefully placed to lead them deeper, so by the time they reached the core, it looked like they found it. Meanwhile, I compiled a secondary archive, one designed for the court of public opinion. Leaks, scandals, screenshots, photos. I lined them all up like bullets in a magazine, ready to fire when the time was right. One afternoon, I followed Roland to an off-base restaurant. He sat in a private booth with a man I didn't recognize. They shook hands, passed a slim folder across the table. I took photos. I recorded audio from the next booth. Their conversation was quiet, but not careful. They spoke in code, but I knew how to read between lines. Something was being transferred: money, equipment, influence. Whatever it was enough to get the man's hands trembling as he left. Roland remained behind, sipping his scotch, unbothered. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't believe he could fall. Men like him never do. Until they do. That night, I uploaded the restaurant audio to a secure cloud account and labeled it Strike Point 1. There would be others. Every piece I collected had a number, a target, and a trigger. I wasn't just aiming to expose him. I wanted to ensure that when he fell, the impact would echo. Every family that buried a flag deserved to hear it. In the weeks that followed, I kept up the act. Casual conversations, therapy appointments, base check-ins. I waved to officers, made jokes with techs in the mess hall. No one suspected the war I was waging under the surface. But every night, I returned to that folder named Balance. And every night, I added another file. One morning, as I sat at a cafe outside the base, I saw Roland on the news, interviewed for a veterans initiative, talking about sacrifice, honor, and the brotherhood of service. I laughed, out loud. People turned to stare. I didn't care. I recorded the segment, clipped his quotes, and saved them under a file called Liar's Creed. It would come in handy later, maybe on the day I delivered everything to the press. But not yet. I wasn't done building the noose. There's a strange kind of calm that comes with planning revenge. Not rage. Not even satisfaction. Just control. That's what I had lacked in that Humvee, back when everything went wrong. I didn't know it then, but I had been spiraling, distracted, emotional, vulnerable. That's how Roland got me. But now, every move I made was calculated. Precise. I woke up at 0500 every day, trained for an hour, made coffee, and sat at my desk like it was a war table. The file called Balance had turned into a full-blown blueprint, part surveillance log, part legal dossier, part obituary in progress. I had timelines. I had patterns. I had enough evidence to sink a 3-star general. And yet, I waited. Because bringing down a man like Roland wasn't about one strike. It was about collapse, slow, inevitable, and public. My first strike wasn't against him directly. It was against his armor, his reputation. I submitted an anonymous report to Internal Affairs at the Pentagon, flagging a discrepancy in supply chain requisitions. Nothing big, just a missing drone battery pack. The kind of thing that might get overlooked in the chaos of deployment. But I attached just enough digital breadcrumbs to suggest a bigger problem. False vendor names. Duplicate serial numbers. Ghost signatures. I knew how the system worked because I used to help manage it. And I knew someone in IA would look at that and think, wait, what else is hiding here? Within days, whispers started. Roland didn't know it yet, but the walls were beginning to close. I followed it with a second report, this one involving personnel misconduct. Not about the affair. That came later. This one focused on a supply clerk who'd been quietly reassigned during our tour. I mentioned how he handled Roland's procurement paperwork and suddenly disappeared mid-deployment without any formal inquiry. I hinted that he'd seen too much, that maybe he'd been silenced. I made sure the report sounded half paranoid, half credible, just enough to warrant a low-level review. The key to destroying a man like Roland wasn't proof. It was doubt. Once that seed took root, people would dig for me. Meanwhile, I tracked his movements. I planted a GPS tag under the rear bumper of his government-issued vehicle. I set up an alert system. If he left base and stopped for more than 5 minutes at any location not on his schedule, I knew. In 3 weeks, he made 4 off-the-record visits to a warehouse just outside Bethesda. It was registered under a dummy logistics company with a shell LLC tracing back to his brother-in-law. I flagged it, filed the paperwork, and forwarded it, again, anonymously. To a defense contracts auditor with a reputation for being aggressive. Now the hammer wasn't in my hand anymore. It was floating above his head, invisible and waiting to fall. But the most brutal strike came next. I created a leak packet. Inside were screenshots of texts between my wife and Roland. Intimate messages. Photos. Flirty exchanges dated and timestamped while we were mid-deployment. I added a copy of her visitor log. The one that showed Roland had signed into my home 3 times while I was overseas. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even enough for a court-martial. But it was toxic. I saved that packet for military family circles. I knew once the rumor mill got a hold of it, his reputation in the community would start to rot. And that's exactly what happened. A military spouse's Facebook group got the leak first. A week later, wives on base were whispering about it in commissary lines. Roland started getting cold stares at barbecues. His wife, from what I heard, threw his clothes out onto the lawn in front of 3 neighbors. One of them recorded it. I found the video online the next day, Roland in boxers, yelling, pleading, holding a ruined dress shirt in his hand like it might change her mind. I downloaded the video, saved it under a folder called Cracks. But even then, it wasn't enough. I wanted the system to betray him. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness I felt in that blown-up village, surrounded by chaos I couldn't stop. So I fed one last line to an old journalist contact, someone who had once embedded with my unit years back. I gave him a scoop. Not the full dossier, just a taste. Former commander under quiet investigation for procurement fraud. More details to come. The journalist posted a tweet. It got 12 shares in the first hour, 50 in the second. By the end of the day, Roland's name was trending in a small corner of military Twitter. That's when I knew it had begun. I watched him from a distance. He walked a little faster now, smiled a little less. His salutes were more robotic. His voice, when I overheard it on base, had a slight edge, tight, clipped. He was trying to maintain control. He didn't know where the shots were coming from. He didn't even know he was bleeding yet. But he would. The final piece of the setup was personal. I booked a meeting under a fake name and scheduled it through an admin Roland trusted. When he showed up to the coffee shop, expecting a potential investor for his post-retirement consulting business, I was sitting in the back corner. Hoodie, cap low. He froze when he saw me. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my drink and slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were 5 photos, each one of a coffin, each draped in an American flag. And on the back of each one, written in block letters, was a name: Jenkins, Rivera, Dawson, Thompson, Price. He stared at them. Didn't open his mouth. He didn't need to. I stood up, leaned close, and whispered, "You didn't just take my wife, Roland. You took them. And I'm going to make sure you lose everything you think makes you a man." Then I walked out. The moment I walked away from that coffee shop, I stopped being Mike, the soldier, the husband, the man who let his brothers die because of a text message. I became something else. Something built from silence, from grief, from all the loyalty that was shattered under the weight of betrayal. That was the day Ghost of Jenkins truly came alive. Not just a username, not just an anonymous tipster, but a reckoning. I didn't exist for sympathy. I didn't want applause. I wanted impact. Cold, surgical, final. And from that point on, I worked like a ghost with unfinished business, haunting the corners of every space Roland thought was safe. The first strike I released wasn't to the media, it was to the base itself. A quiet internal email, routed through an encrypted proxy, sent to the spouses committee. Subject line: protect your own. Inside the message, I attached screenshots of Roland's affair, dated during my squad's final mission. But this time, I added one more thing. A funeral photo. Jenkins' casket being lowered into the ground. The timestamp made it clear, while that boy was being buried, Roland was having dinner with my wife. I didn't need to write anything else. The image spoke for itself. The post was shared over 400 times in one day. The base cafeteria cleared out when Roland walked in the next morning. No one saluted. No one stood. Next, I dropped a whistleblower tip to a watchdog site that specialized in defense contractor fraud. I didn't give them names, just leads. Supply contracts signed by Roland. Item list with falsified delivery receipts. email showing communication between Roland and a shell vendor. I made sure to trail enough evidence so they dig for the rest themselves. Within a week, an investigative journalist reached out to the Department of Defense with questions they weren't prepared to answer. Suddenly, Roland wasn't just a man under suspicion, he was a name on a press inquiry. That's when the military did what it always does when it feels heat. It started to isolate. He was removed from a keynote address on Veterans Affairs. Quietly, no press release. Just a substitution. Then his office access was limited. Routine system audit, they told him. But I knew better. They were protecting themselves. He was radioactive now, and I was just getting started. My next target wasn't him directly. It was his network. Men and women who had helped him hide the affair. Who joked about it behind my back. Who treated my pain like a punchline. I exposed them one by one. Not with rage. With receipts. Messages. Meeting logs. Flight confirmations. A full web of complicity that I unraveled thread by thread. But I saved the most brutal truth for last. The truth about how he'd tampered with the mission itself. I leaked an internal operations report that showed he'd altered our deployment window. That he'd expedited our movement based on faulty intelligence. That we were rushed into the breach zone without the drone surveillance we were promised. That the supply clerk I reported missing, he was reassigned just days after objecting to the mission order. That document didn't just suggest incompetence. It screamed sabotage. I attached it to an anonymous blog post titled, "They Never Came Home," a letter from the ghost. I watched the article go viral overnight. Thousands read it. Hundreds commented. Parents of fallen soldiers shared it, demanding answers. A congressional aide even tweeted about it, calling for a review of the base's command protocols. For the first time in his decorated career, Roland was forced into the one role he never prepared for, defendant. And then, just when the storm hit its peak, I made my final move. I mailed him a package. Inside was a flash drive. No label. No note. Just a drive. When he plugged it in, and I know he did, he would have seen the following. A video montage of my squad. Training together. Laughing. Celebrating birthdays. Jenkins high-fiving Rivera after a long-range shot. Dawson singing off-key in the back of a convoy. All of it set to silence. No music. Just raw footage of what Brotherhood looked like. Then, the footage cut to the wreckage. Drone imagery from the day they died. The smoke. The bodies. The heat signatures fading one by one. Finally, the last screen. A single message typed in white letters on black background. You didn't kill them with a bullet. You killed them with betrayal. Their blood is on your hands. And now everyone knows it. The drive locked itself after playing. He couldn't share it. Couldn't trace it. But he'd never forget it. I heard whispers that he tried to resign. The military denied it. They wanted him to sit through every hearing, every accusation, every consequence. His wife filed for divorce. His pension was frozen. His security clearance suspended. He was placed on indefinite leave, pending investigation. And the cherry on top? The Veterans Board, his pride and joy, voted unanimously to remove him from the Board of Trustees. They cited moral compromise and loss of trust. I didn't watch the news the day it was announced. I already knew the outcome. Instead, I went back to the range. 5 targets again. Not steel this time. Just photos of the men I lost, Jenkins, Rivera, Dawson, Thompson, and me. Because I had to die too. The man I was. The soldier who made the wrong call. I pinned my own photo at the end, stared at it for a long time, then lowered my rifle. I wasn't here to shoot anymore. I was here to remember. To promise them that I'd never forget why I became a ghost in the first place. The silence after a war is louder than the war itself. That's what they never tell you. When the noise stops, the shots, the engines, the screaming, you're left alone with the memories. With ghosts. And mine weren't whispers anymore. They were men. Brothers. And I carried each of their names like weight across my shoulders. Jenkins. Rivera. Dawson. Thompson. I said their names every night before bed like a prayer to know God in particular. Just to keep them close. Just to make sure the part of me that died with them didn't disappear entirely. I had done everything I promised them I would. I destroyed the man who cost them their lives. But the thing about revenge is, it never gives you back what you lost. It just levels the scale. And even then, it's never truly even. The formal charges against Roland came 5 weeks later. Fraud, misuse of government resources, conduct unbecoming of an officer. He was dishonorably discharged. The press had a field day. His affair with a subordinate's wife, the forged orders, the missing supplies. They even got a hold of footage from that base barbecue where he'd laughed about picking up the slack while I was gone. Every joke he ever made at my expense was now burned into the public record, replayed on loop, turned into memes and headlines. He was ruined, not just in uniform, but as a man. His face, once associated with medals and strategy, now pulled up next to words like scandal, coward, disgrace. I watched none of it live. Didn't need to. I was already standing where I needed to be on a quiet hill in Virginia, overlooking 4 graves in a row. Each one identical. White stone. Black letters. American flags folded neatly beneath glass. I brought no flowers. I brought something else. 5 bullet casings. Spent, polished. Each engraved with initials JR, MR, TD, ST, MP. I placed them in front of each marker like medals. My medals. Because this was my final mission. And unlike the one I led overseas, this one, I completed. Then I turned toward the road. There, waiting in the glove box of my truck, was the last letter. Addressed to Roland. Handwritten. No threats. No profanity. Just truth. I kept it short. You once told me a real man leads from the front. But you led from the shadows, behind betrayal and lies. You thought you could bury us with orders and silence. But now you're the one buried, in shame. I made one mistake. You made 2. And that's why I still stand. I mailed it from a post office in his hometown. No return address. No signature. But I knew he'd know who sent it. A month later, I heard he tried to teach a leadership course at a private firm. Veterans protested outside the door. The firm pulled the plug within 48 hours. His name was mud in every military circle that mattered. His wife had sold their home. His kids had changed their last names. I didn't laugh. I didn't cheer. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. But there was still one thing left to do. I went to Jenkins' mother's house on a Sunday morning. She answered the door with tired eyes and opened it before I even spoke. She didn't slap me. Didn't scream. She just held my face in her hands and said, "I knew you'd come when you were ready." I told her everything. No lies. No excuses. From the message that broke me to the mission that went wrong. And finally, to what I'd done to the man responsible. When I finished, she nodded. Then she hugged me longer than I've ever been held. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the truth. For the justice." I visited the other families too. Quietly. Humbly. Some forgave. Some didn't. I didn't expect them to. But they deserved my honesty, not the version painted in medals and silence. Eventually, I returned to civilian life. Took a job with a nonprofit that helped transitioning veterans. Sat in rooms with guys who looked like I used to, lost, angry, drowning. I didn't tell them my whole story. Just enough. Enough to show that even ghosts can find purpose again. Years passed. My ex-wife tried to reach out once. A letter. She wrote about regrets. Apologies. She said Roland had tricked her. That she didn't know how deep it all went. I didn't respond. Not out of hatred. Just closure. Some doors stay shut not because of anger, but because opening them again would only let in more silence. One day, while organizing old boxes, I found the original phone. The one that buzzed in the Humvee. The one that shattered everything. I held it in my hand for a long time. Thought about smashing it. But instead, I placed it in the balance folder, my old archive. I locked it in a fireproof safe and left a note on top. This is the moment everything changed. Not the end. Not the beginning. Just the price of distraction. I still visit the graves. Still say their names. Still remember that I failed once. But I also remember that I made it right. And when I close my eyes at night, I don't see the ambush anymore. I see Jenkins winking from the gunner's seat. Rivera humming that stupid country song. Thompson cleaning his rifle with a smirk. Dawson asking me what girls back home are like. And I see myself, standing beside them, no longer broken. Just a man who remembered. And did something about it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that strength comes after the storm. Subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories of betrayal, redemption, and resilience. And if you've ever walked away from someone who broke your trust, let us know in the comments. Your story might just help someone else find their voice.